I mean, that's why I was quite excited to come on this podcast, on this experience, because I think you have actually created a space where free thought is possible and free communication. So it's like a stage that you've created. I think it's actually quite an important artwork that you have established here. I mean, it's not so easy to create like your own media that has a global reach. So
thank you. I don't know how it happened. It just happened. I think it made itself.
Maybe, yeah.
I think so.
Because the concept was right.
Well, I think, look, I'm the one who's the host of it, so I would be the best to judge. I do not think I'm really responsible for this thing. I think this thing wanted to be made, and it made itself, and it did it in a very sneaky way. It did in a very sneaky way where originally it was just me having fun with my friends, just with a webcam, me and Brian, and then Eddie Bravo and Tom Segura and all my friends. We would just come over and just talk. Just have a good time. And then it started to be where it got enough downloads where I could contact someone like Graham Hancock and say, hey, tell me about ancient civilizations. Come on my podcast.
Right.
Anthony Bourdain, tell me about your travels. And then it became much, much bigger. And it sort of, I genuinely believe it tricked me into making it.
When was the breaking point when it got big? Like
It was very gradual. It was very gradual. I'll tell you when I realized it. I think it was like 2011 or 2012. I was on stage in the Chicago theater, and I was doing comedy, and I asked the audience, I was going to tell a story from the podcast, and I said, how many of you guys listen to the podcast? And it was just, 3,700 people cheering. And I was like, whoa. I'll never forget that moment, because I was like, oh. One of the things that I used to do, and I still do, is I don't look at the numbers. I don't pay attention. I don't pay attention to how many downloads. I'm not like feverishly checking what's good and what's bad. I don't look at like what the retention is when people drop out. That's up to them. My job is to just have an interesting conversation with people that I'm actually excited about talking to. That's my only job. So the way I book it, I completely book it based on my interests. I don't have a publicist that's like examining trends and this person's I don't do any of that.
Yeah,
I think it made itself. I think it made itself. I think it's a trick. I think it's like the muse. Like the muse sort of like brings these ideas into your head. I think the universe gave birth to this thing, and I know it's a stupid hippie thing to say. It sounds ridiculous. But if anybody should know, it's me. And if anybody should want to take responsibility and be proud of something, it would be me, right? But I'm not. I feel like it's not really me. I feel like this thing wanted to be made, and I think this is one of many of these things that want to be made all around the world, and that's why podcasts are developing. I think there's a hunger for honest discourse and real conversations with people that exists everywhere, and I think that's why podcasts are exploding. That's where you don't have a gatekeeper anymore to your ability to discuss things.
People are so frustrated with mainstream media.
Well, you shouldn't have gatekeepers. You shouldn't have someone who the narrative that you're pushing out to the world is heavily influenced by the people that are advertising on your channel.
Yeah.
Heavily influenced. Yeah. So there's certain things you cannot criticize. There's certain things you will gaslight the media or the public into believing is a good thing when it's probably not really a good thing. You will say things in a very biased perspective. You will attack particular individuals. Yeah. You not just attack political individuals, you'll attack them with a very specific narrative that gets repeated over and over and over again to the point where they make these compilations of these media pundits saying the exact same thing over and over and over again. This is not news. This is not real discourse. This is not real human beings discussing things and trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. This is propaganda. And this is most of what people get. And inside that propaganda are some real news. There's actual specific information about the weather. There's actual, real reports about conflicts breaking out overseas and all sorts of different things. But at the end of the day, it's not real conversation. So real conversation was able to flourish because people had this hunger for it. And they didn't even know they wanted it until they got it. I mean, it was thought when we first started making podcasts that everyone was moving to a much shorter attention span. Right. And that most of the things that were going to be popular in the future were like 10-minute things, like very quick things. You know, which is like a lot of the truth today with TikTok and Instagram Reels and, you know, all these things that people like, short attention span, it just captures you, it gives you nothing, and you just keep scrolling and looking. And we thought that's what people are moving to. Yeah. But then podcasts came along. And podcasts came along with 3-hour conversations with scientists that get 50 million views. And then people are like, whoa, okay. So it's not that people aren't intellectually curious. It's not people aren't they don't have this want to be engaged. They do. Everybody does. They're not being fed correctly.